Today on Kaleidoscope, we talk with Reverend James Lewis III, Overseer, and Reverend Zandra Lewis, Pastor of Miracle Missions Full Gospel Church. And we talk with the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Lawrence about faith songs, spirit voices. Kaleidoscope is a production of the Network of Religious Communities and the Canisius College Video Institute. We invite members of various religious traditions of our region to share their stories and talk about their religious holidays and commemorations. Together, we celebrate the wonderful religious diversity of Western New York. Every February since 1926, Americans have honored the gifts and contributions of African Americans with the celebration of Black History Month. In honor of this tradition, Kaleidoscope talks with leaders of African American denominations and congregations located in Western New York. Today we talk with the Reverend James Lewis III, Overseer, and Reverend Zandra Lewis, Pastor of Miracle Missions Full Gospel Church in Buffalo. Pleased to welcome a couple of my very good friends and two people that probably know more about the African American and the mainline churches in Buffalo than anybody else at this time. It's good to have you, the Reverend James Lewis III and Reverend Zandra Lewis, Pastor. Welcome, both of you.
Good to be here with you, Stan.
And you are an overseer.
Yes, sir.
For
the Western New York District of the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship. Bishop Darius G. Pridgeon is the New York State Bishop, and I'm privileged to serve his overseer for 13 churches in Western New York.
And you're pastor of Miracle Mission?
Miracle Missions Full Gospel Church, 406 Sycamore Street in Buffalo, New York. Yes.
And that you're both involved in the Miracle Mission.
I am the founder. We're the founders of the church, and the church has been established 10 years now. And we established the church after I retired from the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, where I pastored for 20 years at the J.W. Logan Memorial AME Zion Church. And we had a wonderful reputation, a great time in the city doing all of that. But a lot of times the polity of different churches, it's kind of difficult to work. And seeing that I have such a very career professionally, and I'm involved in so many different things. And our church was a great church, but it just wasn't big enough to support me and my family in the way that we were accustomed to living. So as I pastored for 20 years, I still had to have a job.
But that's what happens to most African American pastors.
Absolutely. The average church in America is 100 members. And 100 members will basically give a stipend to the pastor, and it will take care of the building and everything else. But don't get confused by mega churches and all these things you see on TV and these big-time pastors. The average church, what keeps the kingdom going, is the small churches, the outposts that God has distributed along the way.
Well, I remember at one point, for example, many of the Baptist churches, African American, they would join what was the American Baptist Convention because there was a retirement program there.
Right.
But then as many of their spouses began to work, like be teachers and so forth, there was a good retirement program there.
Yeah.
And less pressure.
Yeah.
Well, the majority of pastors have always worked. In the history of the black church, we all started out as itinerants. And a lot of times they would have an area, and you would pastor an area. And you would go to a different church every Sunday in that area. And while you were gone, the deacons would run the church, or the trustees, or the steward board, or somebody would be in charge of the church. If you had an assistant, it was a blessing, but they were so limited in pastors at that time. I remember my uncle from North Carolina, John Lewis, who was the presiding elder for the AME Zion Church, talking about getting on his horse and going from church to church. And if the church didn't have enough money to pay him, they had a thing called pounding, that the members would pound the pastor. They would bring him a pound of butter, a pound of corn, a pound of rice. And
as funny as it is, it was true.
It's true, and that's how they would pay him. And they would leave there with their horse strapped with all of the pounds that they received from the members of that church.
Well, they called some of that at that point, some others, the circuit riders.
There you go. And that's what they would do. They would ride that circuit, and sometimes they'd had a good sermon. They'd preach it wherever they went, each one of those circuits along the way. And then when they start all over again, they start a new sermon.
Well, I remember being in some churches, and they needed to raise money to support the pastor.
Right.
So they would take an offering and then stand up front and count it. Nope, we don't have enough. We're taking another one. And the deacons would be in the back blocking the back door.
Locking the door so they couldn't get out because they had to have some way of raising the money. And that is still done in some churches if they don't raise the operational budget. And usually if you put a budget together for a church, you know how much you have to raise every Sunday.
Right.
So a lot of times, don't get envious when you see these beautiful big buildings because you don't want to be there when it's time to pay the mortgage on it.
Well, and one of the struggles for many African American churches is that they bought the buildings for churches that moved to the suburbs.
Exactly.
And lots of building problems.
The churches weren't energy efficient, and whoever it was, the Episcopals, the Presbyterian, the Catholics, whoever left that building, they knew what the problem was. We were excited to get a big church. I pastored a huge church that started out as a Russian Episcopal church. And the church is 200 years old. And before I knew it, the bishop had suggested I move in there because they owned the church and it was bigger than the one I had. And I had outgrown the church I had at 1301 Genesee Street. But they didn't do an energy inspection or anything to tell us what the problems of the building was. And I'm paying $5,000 a month just to heat the 4 buildings that were on that property. And then there was no real heat. There was forced air, and there was no fans to push it down, and the stained glass windows were the actual windows on the building. It was a disaster.
Pastor Zandra, talk a little bit about women in the African American church.
Well, I think it's a new day, and for a while now, because we've had a lot of women ministers today to come into the ministry that have accepted the call and fulfilling that assignment. We even have bishops, women bishops today, and that is something that years ago, 20 years ago, was unheard of. But it's something that, why shouldn't we have? Why shouldn't we preachers? What's holding us back? They're perfectly capable, they're educated, they have studied to show they're self-approved, so it's no reason why women shouldn't step out and become pastors.
Now, if we go back a few generations, but women, although not ordained or didn't have official, the missionary society within the church or the women's organizations had a lot of power.
They were always the pillar of the church. They ran the church. They were the majority of people that were in the church. And it's the same thing that other churches, specifically the Catholic Church, are going through now when they're talking about ordaining women or not to. And I know somewhere in South America they're talking about allowing the priest to be married.
Yeah.
Because that's been a stumbling block for some in the ministry.
Now, you have a kind of dual role because there was, within the African American church, the role of the First Lady has always been a distinctive role.
Yes, it is. It's a very demanding role, especially if you're involved in the church.
Meaning the pastor's wife.
Meaning being the pastor's wife, which is first and foremost. And then not only being the pastor's wife, you have family, which in fact, everybody needs something, and everybody's required to have quality time and things of that nature. So it's kind of demanding. You have your husband who you have to continue to encourage and help him prepare to do what he does out there in the community or in the church. And then you have your children. You have to have time for teaching and embracing and loving them and encouraging them in their careers and whatever they have to do. And then you have a congregation, which likewise needs all those things. And aside from that, they need encouragement for situations that come up and they don't know which way to go. So it's a demanding role, and it requires one to have pretty much balance. You got to be able to balance. You got to be able to say, when to say yes, when to say no, when to refer, and when to just solemnly pray.
But now you're in the role of pastor
Yes.
of the church. And I
Yes.
think I've heard you talk before about it's a little different than the male pastor because you have an understanding of the mother of church.
Well, I think that what women bring to a lot more sensitivity to the role of being a pastor. They're more in tune with certain things, especially with the women of the church and women's ministry and things of that nature, because their needs are different as opposed to how they might address with a male pastor. Although that a lot of women share, they don't have any problem sharing the fact, and they look up to having a male pastor, but there are some that prefer to talk to a woman because of the nature of their problem or concern. So, and I think that being a mother, you have those qualities. You have the love, you have the time, you have the patience, you have the understanding, and you have the sense of empowering and embracing whatever their need or issue might be.
Well, in many parts of the African American church or churches, now women are ordained.
Yes, they are.
There's some that still do not permit
Yeah,
women to take
it's
the
not
leadership role,
acceptable.
but it's even there, it's growing.
Yes, indeed.
It's changing.
Yes,
You
it's-
have some of the old standards that still don't believe women should preach. They take out of context what Paul said, let your women keep silent in church. They need to do a study and find out who he was talking to, why he was saying that, and when he said it.
Absolutely.
And so that is not relevant to anything we're doing. Jesus cleared it up when he said neither Greek nor Jew, nor male nor female, that we're all precious in his sight. He
And each
straightened-
have gifts.
Each
Yeah,
have gifts.
all have
And you need
gifts.
to
And
use
he
them.
talks about the body of Christ. He talks about everybody.
Now, just the sense you've talked about the struggle and so forth, talk just very quickly about how many jobs do you have?
Too many. But it's wonderful. And everything I do is about helping somebody. Whether it's Connect Life, that used to be units, where we talk about organ and tissue donation, we talk about New Life, whether it's working with kids escaping drugs and Renaissance Addiction Services, ECMC, detox and rehab, downtown clinic, whether we're talking about ECMC in general, where we have the greatest trauma team to work with the greatest trauma doctors, and we treat people and we bring people back to life. I changed the name of the hospital to Erie County Miracle
Miracle
Center.
Center.
Because miracles
And
take place.
anytime
Every
you're
day.
going to UCMC, you can find Reverend Lewis there as spiritual care director.
Yep.
And with Miracle Mission Church,
Yes.
you're the pastor.
Yes, I am.
And how many other Sundays do you preach?
Well, we rotate because we do have another executive pastor that is with us and also another minister as well. So we do a rotation. So we, everyone loves to hear overseer preach. It's nothing about they love their leadership. They love to hear his guidance and they respect it very much. So we try our best to give him a break. So at least once a month, all of us have a chance to exhort and express the word that God has given them.
Thank you very much. It's a real gift having you on and really talk about life within the African American church and particularly leaders.